Before we start, let's preface this with a little disclaimer. I am not necessarily the video essay type. If anything, I'm not as much these days. I guess it'd be more accurate to say that I'm not so well versed in the typical art of modern day video essays. I've always been fascinated with how wacky, whimsical, and creative a simple video review could be. And there were so many I liked. But truth be told, I kind of fell off around the time they started to be very clickbaity, I guess? I don't know, leave me alone, I don't know what I'm doing. In the way they try to pull a viewer into a discussion. And of course there's nothing terribly wrong with that, besides the fact that in this day and age, that's just the nature of the algorithm. Video essays are a very fun and engaging way to invoke such discussions and take part in them. But I myself find it kind of hard to do so when the main topic and or question of the video just kind of ends up solving its own mystery or lack thereof, if that makes any sense. And of course the short answer I can give as to my reasoning for not keeping up with the video essay scene as much as I did in the early to mid 2000s is, quite simply, they're just too long. Although that's not so much a viewer retention thing for me as so much as it's how long can this person possibly spend talking about how much they thought this thing sucks when I could just as easily gather that from the title and thumbnail and still have time to run and grab groceries. Again though, no problem with that. Hell, I love nothing more than the opportunity to gush about the things that I like or maybe even dislike. But at the same time, not only would it be a ton of work on my plate in the first place, there's also the aforementioned struggle of not getting much back from what you put into the video. But then there's also the issue of viewer retention again. I don't want to spend too much time speaking my mind about a topic at the expense of your own time. But you know what? Here I am, already doing it, speaking my mind, potentially wasting your time. And you fell right into my trap. There's no turning back. Except, you know, realistically there is. You have more free will than you think, and that's ultimately demonstrated by whether or not you choose to stay here. So stay, or don't. The choice is yours and yours alone. Who's going first?
I am. No, you ain't.
Too long, didn't read, I don't know how I'm gonna go about this, so we're just gonna wing it. Let's get on topic. SpongeBob. Video games. SpongeBob video games.
Now you have my attention.
I think most gamers can agree that far and wide the best SpongeBob video game ever created has got to be Battle For Bikini Bottom. From how tight the gameplay is, to the memorable moments and talented voice acting from most of the original cast, not to mention all the crazy speedrunning tricks you can pull off, even rivaling the likes of Mario 64 with such techniques, it's no wonder that this beloved cult classic ended up earning itself such a reputation and even a remake for modern consoles. So naturally you think that's what this video is going to be all about, me gushing over my favorite game of all time, right? Wrong! Not in this video, my very young apprentice. Instead, we're actually going to be covering a lot of the other SpongeBob video games that came after it. Not necessarily considered to be sequels, since much like the show itself, none of the events that take place in these games follow any sort of direct continuity to one another outside of the occasional Easter egg. Henceforth, the question of this here video essay be, which SpongeBob game can be considered the true spiritual successor to Battle For Bikini Bottom? I think it's only fair to start this discussion with the first game that came after Battle For Bikini Bottom, and that would be the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game. Developed by Heavy Iron Studios, the team that worked on the original Battle For Bikini Bottom, it's no surprise that the gameplay of the movie game is near identical to its predecessor, with a few tweaks I'll go over now. First off, we have manliness points, this game's equivalent to shiny objects. They're no longer a currency, but a gauge for how much more manly you need to be to earn an upgrade point with which to upgrade one of either SpongeBob's or Patrick's moves, or to increase their health. This upgrade system is already a step up in gameplay, especially considering how much more combat-centric the movie game is. Speaking of movesets, since Sandy wasn't present during the quest for the crown, she isn't playable here. But that only makes Patrick's moveset stand out even more, especially given his comparatively low utility in Battle For Bikini Bottom. Patrick boasts the fastest ground-bound movement method with his cartwheel. His ground pound abilities, despite his full potential being locked behind an upgrade, makes a return, as well as his throw ability, which is no longer just a handy technique for solving puzzles. When upgraded, it packs a serious punch and is deadly at long range. And to substitute Sandy's absence, he can also use his tongue to swing on ice blocks over hazards and pits, similar to Sandy's lasso. In contrast to that, SpongeBob's moveset is still the same familiar set of skills presented in a different fashion, but they received quite the manly overhaul since the last game. It is kind of a bummer that he doesn't have his ground pound abilities from Battle For Bikini Bottom, but again, that's probably just to make sure Patrick has his time in the sun. Speaking of which, I love the fact that this game is a lot more linear in terms of structure and design. Given that the plot that it's based off of is the same way, it allows for each level's design to be catered around the character you start that level with. The only time you ever really need to go out of your way to be the other character is for a side challenge involving a treasure chest or a Goofy Goober token you'll need for later. Also, I know that the whole Goofy Goober token thing is a bit of a complaint amongst gamers, but I personally never had that much of a problem with it. It was annoying at first, sure, but I found that it really encouraged the free roam exploration aspects of the game. Just like how Battle For Bikini Bottom had it, only in a more streamlined presentation. The main objective of each level more often than not has you going from point A to point B to beat it. Same as any old video game level, but it still retains the classic collectathon feel within, even if you do have to go out of your way to find some of its fairly well hidden secrets. I mean, think about it. It's really not that much different from being gated out of fighting Bowser in Mario 64 because you don't have enough stars, or not having enough Jiggies or notes in Banjo-Kazooie to unlock the next world. It's practically a staple in 3D collectathon platformers. Of course, you don't have to like it, but that's what this is in essence. On top of all that, the music is kick-ass, the voice acting is top-notch as expected from the OG cast.
SpongeBob, she's hot.
Patrick, I think she can hear you.
Listen up, you two.
The gameplay, art style, and level design is fun and familiar. You can drive the fucking paddy wagon.
You don't need a license to drive a sim.
Slide down death-defying slopes. There's a bunch of challenges you can partake in that really test your skills in each aspect of the game. Oh yeah, and the robots from Battle For Bikini Bottom can be found in the background of the dump level, so it's canon. What more can I say? This is a surefire contender for the best spiritual successor to my favorite game. But wait, there's more! In what can be considered the triumphant third entry in the unofficial Heavy Iron SpongeBob game trilogy, we have SpongeBob's Truth or Square!
Available in 4 designer covers.
Although this game shares the same name as the TV movie that came out in 2009, and on our SpongeBob's 10th anniversary, this game chronologically takes place a day before the 11th anniversary of the Krusty Krab. So that means this game technically qualifies as a prequel, and therefore, it should be allowed on prequel memes. I don't make the rules. The game focuses on a house party at SpongeBob's Pineapple, where SpongeBob misplaces the secret formula, which makes him sad, which makes him not remember where he left it. So SpongeBob's friends, and Plankton, being clearly the nicest selfless guy in Bikini Bottom, offers to help him by having him relive his happiest memories. And the best part is that all these levels, save for the final boss, are all based off actual episodes from the show. And honestly, that was what I was expecting from Truth or Square, the TV movie, in the first place. A clip show of some of SpongeBob's happiest moments from his past. What it ended up being was literally that. It was more akin to an origin story for some of the established constants in the show, from how SpongeBob came to love Krabby Patties and fry cooking ever since he was just a baby in the womb, to him moving into the same neighborhood as Patrick and Squidward. And even back to the time where SpongeBob and Sandy got married? What? I was so excited for this moment when this first came out and it was revealed to be just a play, and I was so upset that it wasn't real. Oh yeah, that and the fact that Plankton actually might have succeeded in stealing the Krabby Patty formula this time, but ended up failing yet again. Some things never change. But what I absolutely loved about that episode was the Flicker and Funnies bit with SpongeBob in black and white. That was seriously so fucking cool, and it kind of paved the way for the many unique animation styles for the SpongeBob universe going forward. But anyways, back to the game. It's one of those short and sweet games you could easily beat in a day, but it's still packed with mechanics, collectibles, challenges, upgrades, and neat little extras that give the game a lot of charm. It's even got co-op, but it's the kind of co-op where the second player isn't going to get a whole lot of contribution points if they don't know what they're doing, or if you're achievement hunting. Think Cappy and Mario Odyssey 2 player, only you're shooting lasers of doom at other robots. In fact, I think that's way cooler, actually. I think it's really impressive how Heavy Iron were able to work entire video game levels around some of SpongeBob's happiest moments, as well as have it blend well with SpongeBob's infectious positive personality. Not to mention making callbacks to both the show and their own games. I mean, for Neptune's sake, they used tracks from their previous 2 games in addition to the production soundtrack. Battle For Bikini Bottom's Jellyfish Fields theme plays during the Jellyfish Fields level, appropriately enough. The badass slide theme from the movie game is used as the mini-boss theme. And for time sequences, what better track to use than the iconic grass skirt chase? Also, did I mention you're fighting robots?
Robot.
How could this not be a spiritual successor? It's the ultimate game of SpongeBob memories, and the style of platforming from the previous 2 games translated very well into that era of gaming. It does help that it was originally developed for the PS2. I was already fully convinced that any SpongeBob game that Heavy Iron touched, they could turn into gold, and this just solidified it. At least that was the case until it ended up being the last SpongeBob game that they would ever develop. But I still held on to that hope that someday we would get another 3D SpongeBob collectathon platformer just like the ones Heavy Iron so graciously blessed upon us. With that being said, it's about time we move on to some of the least likely contenders in this bunch. The Activision duology of SpongeBob games, Plankton's Robotic Revenge and SpongeBob Hero Pants. We'll start with Robotic Revenge. This game was released in 2013, 10 years after Battle For Bikini Bottom. Imagine, 10 years later and us SpongeBob fans finally get the follow-up to the best game in the SpongeBob game catalog. I mean, the other games were more spiritual sequels than direct sequels, so this one's gotta be the latter, right? Well, it's a direct sequel in the sense that we're fighting Plankton's robots again. That's about it, though. Now listen, I'm biased as all hell when it comes to SpongeBob, and as such, there isn't a game from this bunch or any at all that I actively dislike. To that end, this game is honestly pretty alright. It's not groundbreaking, but there's some fun to be had with it. As I said previously, this game was published by Activision, who by this point in time made Call of Duty their claim to fame. So I guess their mindset going into this was SpongeBob with guns, which isn't an unheard of concept.
You know the rules. It's all you
But hey, who else will make it work if not Activision? Honestly though, as excited as I was for this, even I was a bit cautiously optimistic about it, especially given who was making it. Perhaps it might have also been the worries of other SpongeBob fans who thought it was just catering to the first or third person shooter audience, but to be real, the game turned out to be neither of those. It's actually just straight up a 3D platforming shoot 'em up type game. It's simplistic, but it's fun, and upgrading your wacky arsenal of weapons throughout the game, albeit being a bit of a grind, is quite a good time. Especially with friends, which as I understand it makes the grind a little more bearable in fact. I kinda wish I had known that when I was doing the grind single player though. Speaking of co-op, this game offers 4-player couch co-op, which was becoming something of a rarity in this day and age of modern gaming. I say was thanks to the sudden resurgence of multiplayer 2D platformers, but even still, it's a refreshing selling point, all things considered. But even better than that is if you own the Wii U version, you can play with up to 5 players using all 5 playable characters. That is the most players any SpongeBob game has had up to that point, and probably ever. Last time a SpongeBob game had that many players available for co-op was Light Skin and Pants, and let me tell you, that is a fun-ass time. I do have to be fair here though and say that despite all the praise I've given it thus far, Plankton's Robotic Revenge still leaves a little more to be desired. Sure, the gunplay is the main draw of the game. Draw, nice. And while there's decent variety to it, you're more likely to use roughly 2 or 3 weapons the entire way through and maybe not much else. Plus, there isn't a whole lot in the way of depth when it comes to the level design. I wouldn't say that every level is the same per se, but there is a lot of repetition going on, and while I don't usually mind it since every game has some form of repetition present, it's very noticeable. Every other section of a level you get to, there's some kind of obstacle you have to get past followed by a gauntlet. Sometimes even both. It's clear they're trying to keep the gameplay as fresh as they can, but I feel like they could have done more. In short, with deep regret, I must say that SpongeBob SquarePants Plankton's Robotic Revenge is not a contender for the best spiritual successor to Battle for Bikini Bottom. By no means would I call it a bad game though, as I enjoy my time with it very much. I have no doubt that I'd like it more with friends too. Now we move on to the very next release in the Activision duology, SpongeBob Hero Pants. This game chronologically takes place after the events of the SpongeBob movie 2, Sponge Out of Water, as made evident by everyone already being acquainted with Bubbles the Talking Dolphin, who summoned himself to the Bikini Bottom gang and Plankton.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
To warn them that chaos is running amok due to someone using the last page of the magic book from the movie to do just that, and scatter duplicates of the last page throughout the game, which, as you may have guessed, are among the main collectibles. Well, that and some cool little memorabilia statues scattered across each level, but that matters less in the pages unless you're achievement/trophy hunting. So, Bubbles grants them their superhero forms from the movie to go after these lost pages and put things back to normal. From here, gameplay is pretty much the same as Robotic Revenge, only difference being is that the combat is more close quarters based than long range based. But you do get a long range weapon in the form of blaster burgers a little ways into the first level. It's useful, but not as innately dependable as your vast arsenal from the previous game. Not to mention that it consumes ammo this time around. But what's more useful than that, of course, is your superhero meter, which, when full, you can transform your character into their superpowered form, complete with a nice little cutscene.
I'm living extra large. I said extra large.
Now you are the most powerful being to walk the ocean floor! Fast movement speed, long jump distance, high jump height, more powerful versions of your combat moves, unique range attacks, which don't consume any ammo, might I add. It's one of the best examples I can give in gaming where you really feel the withdrawal of a power high, because once you revert back to normal mode, you're already wishing for superhero mode to come back again. This is why you upgrade your superhero meter, baby. Just don't rely on it too much when it comes to platforming in particular, because while you can make leaps and bounds over pits you can't cross with your normal self, you ought to do it the practical intended way, because once your superhero mode runs out, your trip will be cut short and you'll have to wait for the meter to refill. Whoops! Oops! When it comes to level design in this game, it's pretty standard, but then later in the game you're gonna cross little quirks like this. That's kind of a thing. I will admit that the game tends to be a little iffy and glitchy, especially towards the latter half of the game, and that unfortunately kind of makes it a bit weaker than Robotic Revenge in that sense. But overall, the game's fine enough. If you're looking for a basic but fun SpongeBob game experience, especially if you have a kid of your own you think would like it, I'd say these are pretty good entry-level games. But ultimately, I think you're gonna want to show them the masterclass of SpongeBob gaming to them at some point in their life. With that being said, SpongeBob Hero Pants does not qualify as a spiritual successor to Battle for Bikini Bottom. But just as the movie game might be considered to be Battle for Bikini Bottom's spiritual successor, keyword might, there's still some time left in the video lest you forget, Hero Pants may as well be considered the spiritual successor to Plankton's Robotic Revenge. It's kinda cool how history was repeated in this way. And with that being said, in 2015, Activision no longer held the license for SpongeBob SquarePants, and our little yellow friend seemingly had no place left to go. No major video games left to star in, and not even the THQ of old or Heavy Iron Studios were within reach to bring him back to his former glory. Things looked bleak. But there was still hope, for THQ will be resurrected as THQ Nordic. With just a simple announcement by THQ Nordic and Purple Lamp in 2019, it was clear. The king had returned.
I'm ready!
Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. I know it's pretty much the same game, but this is important, alright? It flows well into the next segment. Let's go! This game was a miracle, a tribute, a full-blown validation to the avid licensed gamer enthusiast, such as myself. When I first heard the news about this game, I was on it like you wouldn't believe. I accidentally typed it this way in the script, but it's funnier this way, so I'm keeping it. Believe. I was not nearly as hyped for any other next-gen game on the market like I was with this, even if it is just a remake. Sure, we've had remakes of classic 3D platformer trilogies in the past, like the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy, or the Spyro Reignited trilogy, and those remakes deserve healthy amounts of praise and exposure too, because they're so beloved. But it's not just any 3D platformer remake, alright? It's one that legitimized how great a licensed game could be, to garner such fantastic cult classic status and receive a re-release from the ground up. I mean, think about it for a second. Before Battle for Bikini Bottom, how many other IPs can you think of that got a re-release that didn't start out as a game series first? I'm serious, I cannot think of another example. I'm like 100% certain that Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is the first licensed game remake to ever exist. That in itself is revolutionary. It makes me proud to have stuck around for the long haul, seeing my favorite game being remade in glorious HD splendor. I feel justified and validated in having such an underrated gem of a game come such a long way. But does it live up to the original? In many ways, I'd say so. I'm not a stickler for how a game looks so much as how it plays or how fun it is, but they really did a great job with the graphics and animations for this game. The textures give off a cute action figure-y kind of vibe, and the colors pop out with such vibrancy, even surpassing the original in that respect. But can it be considered a spiritual successor to the original? In many ways, I'd say so. The game may be the same, but there's alterations to the level design, physics, and overall game feel that only true fans can understand. To me, it felt like playing a whole new game, even though it was familiar. You know what they say, old sponge, new tricks. But before we reach our conclusion, we have but one more game in the sponge that needs talking about. In many ways, I'd say so. And seeing how it's directly the next major release in the SpongeBob game catalog, I think you know which one that is. SpongeBob SquarePants: The Cosmic Shake. I can't even begin to accurately describe the way this game made me feel. Part of the reason I was so hesitant to even make this video in the first place was my intimidation over fully expressing my feelings on this game, because I feared I'd never be able to do it justice. But here goes anyway. I legitimately thought I would never feel the way I felt playing the original Battle for Bikini Bottom again. Until this game. I am a PS2 era guy, through and through. 3D platformers from that time were my bread and butter, and I could detect those vibes from those kinds of games from the moment I saw and heard them. Very few games from the 7th, 8th, and 9th generations of consoles have matched that feeling for me. Games like the Uncharted series, LEGO Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor, just to name a few. It wasn't until I finally got my hands on Cosmic Shake on release day and thought, this is why I love video games. It plays the same as Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, but much more refined and smooth in terms of how it runs and plays. It's got its own style, the gameplay is tight, it's got a unique story, elements of the aforementioned aspects are reminiscent of previous entries, the dynamic music tracks are a treat that add a lot to the overall experience, the graphics, animations, and presentation are all so expressive, and it does what Battle for Bikini Bottom does. It feels like you're playing an episode or a special straight out of the show. I feel like Rehydrated was Purple Lamp's way of testing the waters, pun intended, with how they can make a SpongeBob game. And once they no longer had to focus on remaking a beloved classic to a T, they just went off, man! They went ahead and made the best possible SpongeBob game they could make with what they established, and let me tell you, man, they delivered. My heart was aflutter with how much I felt like a kid again while playing this game. It has all the right niches and quirks of a 3D platformer from the PS2 era, which is what I've always yearned for ever since the genre seemed to have phased out of the mainstream during the early to mid 2010s. I love being able to just run around various worlds in a game, collecting things in any order I want with no strings attached, in any fashion I want, provided I can actually pull it off. Speaking of fashion, hot damn are these costumes nice! They may just be purely cosmetic, but sometimes in games, that's all you really need. The clothes make the man. Sponge Man. And man, don't even get me started on Glove World. I was already pretty content with the pier level from Goo Lagoon and Battle for Bikini Bottom, but man, Glove World exceeded my expectations and then some. It might just be one of my favorite final levels in any platforming game, or just in any game in general. Also, a next-gen update for Cosmic Shake came out on October 23rd, 2023, which also included Photo Mode. I love Photo Mode. I have abused the ever-loving fuck out of Photo Mode in this game. Best believe, baby. Well, I guess that about does it for every game we've covered in this bunch. Now comes the verdict. Which of these games deserves to be considered the SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom's spiritual successor? Well, it's unfortunately not these two, but at least you have honorable mentions. Honestly, I'm gonna be real with y'all, this is too hard, and if you need to know one thing about me, it's that I can't make and stick to a decision that I know may change with time, which is a huge reason why asking myself this question in the first place was so difficult for me. My opinions are always absolute. Tentatively. So, after careful consideration and my own indecisive, stubborn-ass notions in mind, I've reached a verdict that may or may not please everyone, especially if you're looking for a single definitive answer to this, but one that makes sense to me and one I can personally be satisfied with. And if you're not, oh well! In the case of Heavy Iron's Battle for Bikini Bottom, the SpongeBob movie game is its spiritual successor, with Truth or Square essentially being the successor to the Happy Squared Pack here, as it were. While in the case of Purple Lamp's Battle for Bikini Bottom, Cosmic Shake is its spiritual successor. This is largely in part of the fact that these games were made by entirely different dev teams at different periods in time. I'm not the kind of guy that buys into the whole generation gap thing, and I'm not about to be, especially given that history preservation practically exists for the sole purpose of passing on the relics and knowledge of the older generations to the youth of today, which I think is truly awesome. I love the idea of parents introducing to their children the things that shape their young lives and passing that joy on to them, regardless of the impact it will ultimately have on their overall growth. However, everyone's raised differently. Not everyone's going to be able to hold on to all the memories they hold so dear in a physical or sometimes less reliably, a mental sense. But emotionally, those memories can last forever. And of course, there's a bittersweetness to that whole statement in regards to the possibility of the original Battle for Bikini Bottom not getting the proper exposure it so rightfully deserves. But honestly, that's okay. Perhaps all this time we've waited for a true sequel to Heavy Iron's Battle for Bikini Bottom, they kinda already gave it to us, and we were riding the high of how good it all was, not knowing that one day it would eventually stop for a time, and we wouldn't be able to fully appreciate it until sometime after the party was over. Besides, it's not like it really matters too terribly much at the end of the day, because 1, game preservation, y'all, and 2, the sheer fact that a game like Battle for Bikini Bottom, which resonates so strongly and emotionally for me and many others, can be presented once more to a new generation of SpongeBob fans and gamers alike, makes me so much more grateful for its existence and resurgence into the gaming scene, and even more grateful that a game as wonderful and brilliant as Cosmic Shake came to be as a result of this successful venture. Funny. It seems as though history repeated itself yet again. Battle for Bikini Bottom and its spiritual successor, the movie game, Plankton's Robotic Revenge and its spiritual successor, Hero Pants, and finally, Rehydrated and its spiritual successor, Cosmic Shake. There's something so inexplainably satisfying about watching a franchise you love grow its beard, get it trimmed, sometimes have it completely shaved off, and grow all over again to be bigger and better. You were there to witness its journey, through its ups and downs, where it is now, and looking back, you find yourself proud of how far it's come. So that's the verdict. Though I bet you're wondering which of these games are my absolute favorite after all this time. Well, to put it simply, I would always cite the original Heavy Iron trilogy to be my top 3 favorite SpongeBob games, highest to lowest in order of release, with OG Battle for Bikini Bottom and Rehydrated interchangeably at the #1 spot. But Cosmic Shake is also tied with #1. I told you! I'm indecisive! I can't pick favorites! It's impossible! You're just gonna have to deal with that! This has been my 1000 video special. Thank you all for watching. Word to your mother! Woo! I just want to go ahead and give a great big shout out and thank you to Ava Drew for helping me out with this video. She reached out to me and offered me to commission her for these animated versions of me that you saw throughout this video. If you liked what you saw and you want to commission her as well, you can find her socials in the description below. And I highly recommend that you do, because she's been a great big help and very important to this project, so thank you again, Ava. And of course, a massive thank you to you, the viewer. If you've ever watched even just a second of my videos or have stuck around this long, I'm eternally grateful and happy to have made it to 1,000 videos. And here's to 1,000 more. Hopefully I'll see you guys along for more of the ride, because it's going to be a fun one. So until then, guys, love you all, stay safe, take care, and happy holidays.